as we think of training, there's a number of different considerations that we need to take into account as we're putting together a training session. And one way that I've been able to start to organize my thoughts around this is really to take a look at two specific aspects of training. So, one of those aspects is the amount of information that we want to present, right? So, and if you take a look at this matrix that's on there, I call this the training intention matrix. It goes from left to right. So we can have a range of information from loads of content on one side to content that's highly prioritized on the other. And sometimes it's kind of a mix. So you have that continuum. And then from bottom to top of this matrix, what we have is our intent. So, do we just want to make people aware of certain things? And so this is kind of that information sharing type of thing. Or do we want people to be able to do things differently or better? This is kind of the performance type of thing. And so what I'd love for you to do is to kind of digest this for a moment. And then I'm going to put another question up on the screen. And that question is going to be, in what quadrant do you feel a lot of your organization's training falls? So, do you feel like your organization is putting lots of content? And when we take a look at this, you take a look at the top of the screen too, right? The title of this is for a 1 to 2 hour session, which is the typical length of time that a lot of like training sessions run. So some training sessions run 5 days and you can put lots of content in there. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is a typical session. It could be a lunch and learn. It could be just kind of a session, an orientation session, onboarding session, a session that you would do that takes about 1 to 2 hours. And if you think about that kind of session, and if you think about the kind of training that your organization offers, my question to you is, where do you think you fall? Is it our organization likes to put loads of content and expects people to do things new or differently or better? That's quadrant one. Is it we do loads of content, we just need people to be aware of things? That's quadrant two. Quadrant three is we prioritize things really, but we still just want people to be aware. And then quadrant four is we prioritize things and we want people to do things new or differently or better. So go ahead and try to give me an idea of where your organization falls when it comes um, to what kind of trainings you're doing. I'm just seeing some comments here in the chat as people are filling out this or people are responding to this poll. 1 to 2 hours of training would lend to quadrants two and three for their organization, 2 to 3. So I see some people saying, if this is a continuum, I might be kind of 2 to 3. Let's go ahead and end this poll. And what we're seeing is just kind of a bunch of different responses. And so I think this is really interesting in terms of the distribution of where we find ourselves when it comes to where the kind of organization where we find ourselves with this. And so when we think of this, whether it's quadrant one or two or three or four, I want to also kind of keep in mind not just where our organizations fall in this, but also what our learners' expectation is for training. And when I do a train the trainer session, one of the things that I'll always I'll start off a train the trainer session by asking this question: what's the best professional development experience you've ever had? And people will talk a little bit, and then I'll bring them back together as a large group, and then I'll ask, what made it so good? And this is the typical list that I get. So when it comes to participants say, when it comes to their best professional development experiences, they say it's hands-on. They say it's interactive. They learn from others. They have an opportunity to share. They're allowed to make mistakes and then learn from those mistakes in the training room. There's accountability. Sometimes they even say, props are used and then it's relevant or people are able to put it to use right away. These are not my words. These are words from participants from actual flip charts that I've written during train the trainer sessions in terms of their best professional development experiences. So when the thing here is that we kind of in our gut know what good training feels like. And then when it comes to designing training, we have all these competing priorities. But the thing that I've never, ever heard anybody else mention in terms of their best professional development experience is I had a chance just to listen for an hour straight, or they lectured at me for the entire time, or we got so much content, which made it such a great professional development experience, right? Nobody's ever said that, and yet when we are putting together training, a lot of times that's what it ends up being, and so that's what we're trying to address here. And so when we think of these quadrants again, up in this upper right hand corner, that quadrant one, where and this is a lot of times when I'm doing a train the trainer session and we'll do adult learning theory and people are like, oh, okay, I want this to be interactive, I want it to be engaging, I want people to say this is their best learning experience. And then they'll tell me, but if I only have an hour, I have all this content I need to cover. And the problem with quadrant one is that it really is not realistic. To have loads of content and to expect people to do things new or differently or better in 1 or 2 hours, it's just not realistic. And so something's got to give. And sometimes that thing that has to give is okay, maybe we have all this content, but maybe we don't need people to do things new or differently or better. We'll take the activities out. We just want them to be aware of some of this information. And that gets us to quadrant two, which is we're basically just checking the box. And so and you've probably experienced this kind of training. Perhaps you're even asked to put this training together. I was doing a train the trainer session in Des Moines earlier this year, and the sponsor of the program at one point asked, well, but we have a legal department that says we need to cover all this stuff. They don't care about the activities. We just have to cover all this stuff. And that's awareness training, right? It's almost like I don't even know if training is the right word. It's almost like fine print, right? It's checking the box. If we want people to actually start to really digest some of this information, we need to move over to the right side of this matrix. And in box number three, that's where when we can start to prioritize critical content and we want people to be aware of things. We don't necessarily have the expectation they're going to do something new or differently or better. That's where we start to get some training that's a little bit more engaging, a little bit more fun. This is when we can start to bring in activities like Jeopardy or Kahoot. We can have case study discussions. We can have discussions that are at conceptual level. People may leave quadrant three kind of trainings and say, that was the best training I've ever had. Now, which is great. That's a data point. It's not the only data point that's important, but it's a data point, and it's certainly better than I was so bored, right? But then we kind of take a look at quadrant four, and that's where we start to get effective because we expect people to do something new or differently or better. We have the right amount of information. We make sure that we're not flooding people with a bunch of information they don't need, and that's where we get to effective. And so, in order to get around this matrix here and get us into quadrant four, I'm going to give you a formula here. And the formula, it's especially if you've been in the world of training and development, if you've been exposed to these concepts, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple, but it's also it requires a lot of work. It also requires time to be able to do this stuff. And so let's talk about this real quick, and then I'll kind of give you an example of what this looks like. So the formula goes, the first thing you need are well-crafted learning objectives. I'll talk about those in just a second. And you need to add those to instructionally sound training design. Okay, this is super generic. This formula is super generic. So I'm not necessarily perhaps telling you something that you didn't know already, but let's dive into what these things actually mean. Because the fact is, if you do follow this formula, and there are some underlying layers to this formula, but if you follow this formula, every single time you will not have a lecture heavy training. So let's talk about